Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where we're following multiple developments surrounding the nationwide backlash over the Trump administration's deadly immigration enforcement operation in Minneapolis, including from lawmakers on Capitol Hill, where a dispute over ICE funding could lead to a government shutdown tomorrow. That comes as White House border czar Tom Homan, who is now in charge of ICE operations in Minneapolis, is trying to turn down the temperature, acknowledging there are issues.
Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where we're following multiple developments surrounding the nationwide backlash over the Trump administration's deadly immigration enforcement operation in Minneapolis, including from lawmakers on Capitol Hill, where a dispute over ICE funding could lead to a government shutdown tomorrow. That comes as White House borders Tom H. Home. Home, 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 home. Home man, who is now in charge of ICE operations in Minneapolis, is trying to turn down the temperature, acknowledging there are issues on the ground that need to be fixed. And as the president held a cabinet meeting today, but made no mention of Minnesota or his immigration enforcement operations, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was not among those cabinet members the president called on to speak.
And as the president held a cabinet meeting today, but made no mention of Minnesota or his immigration enforcement operations, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was not among those cabinet members the president called on to speak. But the president did say he's working with Democrats to strike a deal to keep the government open. Even as Democrats voted to block a package of government funding bills in protest of ICE tactics. Take a listen. Hopefully we won't have a shutdown. We're working on that right now. I think we're getting close. The Democrats, I don't believe, want to see it either. So we'll work in a very bipartisan way. I believe not to have a shutdown. We don't want to. All right, here's the scoop from Washington. There's quite a bit happening right now regarding the backlash over the Trump administration's immigration enforcement operation in Minneapolis. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill are in a bit of a tiff over ICE funding, and this could lead to a government shutdown as soon as tomorrow. Meanwhile, Tom H. Homan, the guy in charge of ICE operations in Minneapolis, is trying to calm the situation by admitting there are issues to work on. Interestingly, during a cabinet meeting today, the president didn't mention Minnesota or the immigration actions, and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem wasn't called to speak.
Hopefully we won't have a shutdown. We're working on that right now. I think we're getting close. The Democrats, I don't believe, want to see it either. So we'll work in a very bipartisan way, I believe, not to have.
Despite that, the president assured that he's collaborating with Democrats to avoid a shutdown. Although Democrats were protesting by blocking a package of government funding bills regarding ICE tactics, he seemed optimistic, saying something like they were getting close to a deal and that both sides didn't want to shut down. Now, here's where things get really intriguing in Congress. The Senate isn't just mulling over the idea of removing Trump anymore. They're seriously starting to use the constitutional processes that could make it happen. We're not just talking about casual chats. Impeachment articles have already been filed in the House, and we've got war powers resolutions passing in the Senate with support from both parties. There are also senators putting forward resolutions that declare Trump ineligible for future office under the 14th Amendment, plus renewed talks about using the 25th Amendment because some believe he's unable to fulfill his duties. And get this, Trump is fully aware that this is on the table. During a closed-door meeting with House Republicans back on January 6, 2026, he actually said, "If we don't win the midterms, I will get impeached." So, he's basically admitting that if the Democrats take control of Congress, it could very likely lead to his impeachment. It's shaping up to be quite a political showdown.
Professionalism, quote, will be dealt with. How were those comments met by the folks on the ground there in Minneapolis? Pretty strong statement.
They are, and I think everyone agrees that there should be some sort of de-escalation. And I will say that being on the ground here, when you don't have federal agents present, you don't see.
It's really interesting how we're seeing multiple ways to potentially remove Trump using constitutional processes. He himself seems to be aware that impeachment is on the table, especially if he doesn't do well in the midterms.
On top of that, some senators from both sides are ready to call him out on his more extreme actions. The crazy part is that Trump's grip on power now relies on the very protocols that could actually kick him out of office, a pretty uncomfortable place for any president to find themselves. Professionalism, quote, will be dealt with. How are those comments met by the folks on the ground there in Minneapolis? Pretty strong statement. They are. And I think everyone agrees that there should be some sort of de-escalation. And I will say that being on the ground here, when you don't have federal agents present, you don't see the violence that you saw maybe on Saturday after the shooting of Alex Prey, because when they are here, those confrontations get extremely tense. There's definitely a lot going on with Trump and his troubles. For instance, on April 28, 2025, Representative Schreier introduced House Resolution 353, listing 7 articles of impeachment against him. These include some serious stuff like obstruction of justice, messing with Congress's budget powers, abuse of trade authority, international aggression, bribery, and corruption. We're talking about clear, specific allegations, not just general complaints. Then, fast forward to December 10th, 2025, when Representative Al Green put forth another resolution, House Resolution 939. This one charges Trump with abuse of power and inciting violence against lawmakers and federal judges. Green's resolution warns that allowing Trump to stay in office would only lead to more violence and further harm to our democracy. It's hard to ignore how many serious challenges he's facing from within Congress now. Right now, several members of the House have officially put forward resolutions to invoke the impeachment clause against Trump while he's in his second term. Even though these resolutions haven't passed yet because Republicans still hold the House, they're on record and make a solid constitutional case for his removal. If the Democrats take back the House in the midterms of 2026, those resolutions or something similar could quickly come back to life. The groundwork is set, but it doesn't stop there. The Senate recently voted 52-47 in favor of a war powers resolution that would prevent Trump from using military force in Venezuela without getting approval from Congress. Interestingly, 5 Republicans joined all the Democrats to support this resolution. That's the Senate actively using the War Powers Act to limit Trump's ability to start military conflicts, a direct challenge to presidential power. There's also Senate Resolution 154, which has been introduced to declare Trump ineligible for future presidential or vice presidential elections. This resolution directly cites Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, specifically the Insurrection Disqualification Clause, asserting that Trump participated in insurrection and thus cannot hold office again. Whether this resolution passes or not, it's another constitutional avenue being formally explored against him. And on top of that, there's talk about the 25th Amendment. Some lawmakers and commentators are considering the possibility of using Section 4 to declare Trump unable to perform his duties due to his erratic behavior. For this to go through, Vice President Vance and a majority of the cabinet would need to declare him unfit, which seems pretty unlikely given their loyalty to Trump. But the mere fact that serious discussions are happening about this shows just how extreme things have become. With his unpredictable foreign policy moves, like trying to acquire Greenland and escalating tensions with Venezuela and Iran, there are growing concerns regarding his mental fitness. If the 25th Amendment were to be put into action, Vance and the cabinet would need to state that Trump is unable to serve. Then Congress would have to vote on it. If 2/3 of both chambers agreed, that would lead to Trump being permanently removed. That's a pretty high hurdle to clear, but the constitutional process is out there and is being talked about as a potential option. It's quite the situation we have with Trump right now. He seems very aware of the potential consequences ahead. His remark to House Republicans about getting impeached if they lose the midterms shows he's clued in on the political landscape. The Republicans only have a slim majority of 5 votes in the House, and with the historical trends of midterm elections, it's totally feasible for Democrats to take over in 2026. If that happens, impeachment would be practically a given. And if Democrats manage to grab the Senate too, the chance of actually convicting him becomes very real. We're seeing all sorts of constitutional actions being talked about too. There are articles of impeachment filed, discussions around war powers, proposals for disqualification under the 14th Amendment, and talk of the 25th Amendment for removal. It's like Congress is gearing up to pull every lever they can to get him out of power. The midterms in 2026 will really determine which of these strategies are put into play, if any. Let's dive into these constitutional options and why they're all aimed at Trump right now. First up is impeachment, the one that most people are familiar with. The Constitution says that the House has the sole authority to impeach, which means they can accuse a president of high crimes and misdemeanors. The Senate then holds a trial and needs a two-thirds vote to convict, which leads to removal from office. Trump's been impeached twice already, once for his behavior with Ukraine and abuse of power, and again for inciting the insurrection on January 6th. He dodged both bullets because Senate Republicans backed him up. Now, here we are in his second term, and House Democrats are wasting no time with new impeachment articles. Representative Venedar has put forward a thorough 7-article resolution that charges Trump with several serious offenses. One of the charges is for obstructing justice, which is illustrated by his meddling in investigations and issuing pardons to his allies. There's also a charge for overriding Congress's power over the budget, reflecting his attempts to divert funds that were already appropriated. Trump's trade policies are also under scrutiny, as they might be overstepping his presidential authority and harming American interests. And we can't forget the charge regarding international aggression. This includes his bullying tactics toward Greenland, military maneuvers in Venezuela, and his increasingly heated remarks about Iran. Lastly, there are bribery and corruption allegations tied to various pay-to-play schemes that have come to light, like those involving Swiss dealings. So, there's a lot going on with Trump and some serious allegations flying around. It turns out he might have received gifts from Swiss business leaders that tie into some tariff reduction issues. The charges against him aren't just idle talk. They're based on specific evidence and connected to constitutional violations he supposedly committed. We're looking at a real legal case for impeachment that's presented in a formal House resolution style. If the Democrats manage to snag the House again in 2026, they could quickly bring these articles or similar ones up for a vote. Representative Green is zeroing in on Trump's tendency to incite violence and threaten officials. He points out how Trump has a habit of going after judges, lawmakers, and prosecutors, and this kind of behavior seems to inspire his supporters to behave violently or even make death threats. Green believes Trump's words create a direct threat to both democracy and the safety of government officials. He warns that if Trump isn't held accountable, things could spiral into further violence. Now, the whole impeachment scenario is a pretty fascinating political calculation. Trump has already faced impeachment twice and been acquitted both times, which makes some Democrats a bit hesitant about pushing for a third impeachment, fearing it might come off as partisan maneuvering. Others, however, argue that each impeachment should be treated on its own merits, especially since it's their constitutional responsibility to follow through on new conduct they deem unacceptable. Interestingly, Trump himself has remarked that he expects to be impeached if the Democrats regain power, almost like he thinks it's a given. When it comes to the actual voting, it's a numbers game. The Democrats would need a simple majority in the House to impeach, which they'd easily achieve if they win the chamber. However, securing a two-thirds majority in the Senate, or 67 votes to convict and remove, is a whole different ball game. That's going to require winning the Senate and convincing quite a few Republicans to side with them. The chances of that happening seem pretty slim, unless Trump does something so outrageous that it leaves Republican senators with no choice. Still, just having the threat of impeachment hanging over him has its benefits. It keeps Trump somewhat in check, as he understands that any extreme actions could provoke impeachment proceedings. Plus, it means ongoing discussions about his scandals and misdeeds, since each article of impeachment chronicles specific wrongdoings. Ultimately, it reinforces the idea that presidents can be held accountable through constitutional means, even if removal doesn't ultimately take place. And speaking of constraints, let's dive into the War Powers Resolution, as that presents a different layer of constitutional checks. The War Powers Act is supposed to make presidents seek approval from Congress for longer military operations. However, many presidents have a tendency to overlook this or interpret it in a way that fits their narrative, often claiming their role as commander-in-chief gives them the green light to use force without Congress's okay. Trump has really leaned into this aggressive stance, threatening military action in several instances, like overthrowing Maduro in Venezuela or even seizing Greenland from Denmark. He's ramped up the tough talk about striking Iran, too. Now, Congress has had enough, and there's been some pushback, including from members of his own party. The Senate passed a resolution number 5247 aimed at preventing Trump from engaging in military activities in Venezuela. This is significant because it shows bipartisan support. 5 Republicans actually teamed up with Democrats to make this happen. This resolution indicates that Trump is losing support even among his own ranks when it comes to his more reckless military ideas, and it sets a precedent that Congress will actively use its war powers to keep Trump in check rather than just grumble about his choices. If Trump decides to ignore this resolution and goes ahead with an attack on Venezuela without congressional approval, he'd clearly be breaking both the War Powers Act and this Senate resolution that could open him up to impeachment on those grounds alone. And it could also give courts the ability to block any military actions. Plus, it would empower military officers to refuse any unlawful orders he might give. The Senate is laying down a constitutional marker that Trump would be wise to respect. Then there's the matter of the 14th Amendment disqualification resolution, which is particularly noteworthy because it's referencing Section 3. This section prohibits anyone involved in insurrection from holding federal office. Some states had previously tried to use this to keep Trump off the ballot for 2024, but the Supreme Court decided that states can't disqualify him on their own. However, they did leave the door open for Congress to enforce this provision through legislation. Senate Resolution 154 is an attempt by Congress to declare Trump ineligible for future office, essentially saying they believe he engaged in insurrection on January 6th, which means he can't hold office according to the 14th Amendment. Even if this resolution doesn't pass or doesn't have an immediate legal impact, it represents a formal statement from Congress invoking this constitutional disqualification against a sitting president, setting the stage for future moves. If Democrats take control of Congress, this could lead to even more serious repercussions for Trump down the line. So, here's the scoop. There are some serious talks going on about how the 14th Amendment could actually come into play to block Trump from running for office again. People are suggesting they could hold hearings to dig into what really happened on January 6th, laying down a solid record of Trump's involvement. There's even chatter about setting up a legal plan to keep him from making a comeback in 2028, just in case he somehow wriggles out of an impeachment conviction. Now, the 25th Amendment might be the least likely route, but it sure is dramatic. It allows the vice president and the cabinet to decide if a president can't carry out his duties and temporarily kick him out of power. The president can put up a fight, which leads to a vote in Congress. If both chambers can gather a 2/3 majority agreeing that the president isn't fit to serve, then goodbye and the vice president steps in. It's never actually been used to force a president out like that, though. It was intended for scenarios like if a president is in a coma or can't think clearly anymore. But some folks are pointing out that Trump's unpredictable behavior, signs of cognitive decline, those wild swings in his foreign policy, and his difficulty in separating reality from fantasy might fit the bill for being unable to do his job. The tricky part, Vance and the cabinet are all Trump loyalists. So they'd essentially have to stab him in the back to go for the 25th Amendment. Unless Trump reaches a point of being undeniably unfit, it seems nearly impossible. I mean, if he were to have a complete meltdown on camera or say something so outlandish that even his cabinet started sweating for national security, then maybe we'd see a shift. It's telling that legal experts and commentators are seriously throwing around the 25th Amendment as a possibility for removing Trump, reflecting how worried people are about his mental state and decision-making. It's another part of the constitutional puzzle to consider if things take a turn for the worse. Combining all these angles, you really start to see a president who's teetering on the edge of being constitutionally removed.